Today on the Muslim Street, we will be discussing U.S.-Pakistani relationships, especially in light of the upcoming elections in both countries. Today, we are very glad to have on the show with us Muhammed Malik, who is a Kashmiri American human rights advocate. Muhammad is really one of my mentors in this community and someone that I look up to a lot. I'm very happy to have him join us today on the show. He is the former executive director of CARE South Florida, and he has also recently worked for the ACLU Florida as its racial justice and voting rights specialist. Outside of his human rights work, he sits on the Green Party's International Affairs Committee and is a co-producer of the acclaimed Let's Talk About It weekly radio program. Muhammad is also a radio host, and again, his radio program is called Let's Talk About It. A recent recipient of BORDC's Patriot Award, Muhammed Malik was also recently selected as a 2011 Profile of Courage, along with the likes of Amy Goodman and Glenn Greenwald by LoonWatch.com, which is a popular website that monitors and exposes political reactionaries. Muhammad, welcome to the Muslim Street. Muhammad?
Some technical difficulties right now, but we'll get them in. One of the things I didn't know Muhammad was part of the Green Party. I voted Green Party in the last election.
Definitely.
They ran, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney as their president, and Rosa Clemente as the vice president. These are two activists you need to check out. Their principles. These are principled peoples in terms of the politics. And I think we're going to have Muhammad join us here. Muhammad, you on the line?
Hey, how you doing?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. How you doing?
Welcome to the Muslim Street.
Welcome to the show, Muhammad. Can you hear us? Sorry, I think we appear to have had some technical difficulties earlier on, but thank you so much for joining us on the Muslim Street. We've been discussing Pakistan since the show began, and I kind of wanted to start this conversation by asking you, why is Pakistan important, especially with the 2012 presidential elections coming up, as well as, elections in general. Pakistan has been a very interesting country, especially in terms of American foreign policy. And when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the question of, is Pakistan a friend or foe? So, go ahead and give us what you think about why is Pakistan important for American and U.S. foreign policy?
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, before we even talk about whether Pakistan is their friend or foe, there's certain realities about Pakistan, no matter on what side of the aisle or what perspective you're coming from, that clearly show that Pakistan is this important, this period in world politics that you have to figure out. Whether you're in the United States and, you have certain critiques of Pakistan, for example, like some of the foreign aid critiques that many people have had recently, there's just a couple of basic facts, like the fact that Pakistan is soon going to have, the fifth largest population in the world. I believe it has the seventh largest army in the world, right? And as far as a nuclear power, I believe that pretty soon it should overtake the United Kingdom as the fifth largest nuclear power in the world. And its demographic location, its geographic location, the shifting demographics within Pakistan, and its military might and all these other sort of factors just sort of set the stage for why Pakistan is a very important sort of player in world politics. So I think that's very important to establish from the forefront is sort of, where does Pakistan sort of fit into the picture in terms of security interests for the world. And then your question, I think, was about why is it that Americans should care about U.S.-Pakistan relationship?
Right.
Well, I mean, for a number of reasons. Obviously, there was an occupation of Afghanistan. And obviously, the destabilization in any part of the world is going to impact, world economic markets. It's going to impact, global security. And so, especially in a place where there's nuclear power, where there's a burgeoning population, where you have very tumultuous sort of internal political issues and a possible election coming up, it's very important to continue to engage Pakistan and to be aware of what's happening there, because again, it's it's almost like what Martin Luther King said. That I guess if you extrapolate what he said, he said that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I think that a threat to security anywhere is a threat. A threat to security anywhere is a threat to security everywhere. So it has ramifications all across the world and the region. So definitely something that's very important people should focus on.
Muhammad, you brought up a couple of very interesting points, especially with the exponentially growing population of Pakistan and soon to
Right.
be the fifth strongest nuclear power in the world. But at the same time, we're seeing a very corrupt and constantly changing political authority in Pakistan, which is this stigma that's grown between a military dictatorship or a civilian autocracy. So is
Right.
this something to worry about in that, this is a country of over 180 million people. This is going to be the fifth largest nuclear power. This is one of the largest armies in the world. But at the same time, it has very unstable political ruling within the country.
Right. Yeah, and that's, as you said, that Pakistan is sort of in a way has shifted back and forth like a pendulum, back and forth between a civilian, very incompetent civilian autocracy and military dictatorship. And so, unfortunately, the trend that you see is that regardless of whether it's a military dictatorship or a civilian government, there's always been the issue of corruption, and there's always been the issue of whether the government really actually serves the interests of the people. Now, I mean, critics could say that, you could say that about every single government, that every government can criticize for not serving the interests of the people. But because of the geostrategic importance of Pakistan and the role it played in the Cold War, and today the role that it plays in counterterrorism policy around the world, unfortunately, Pakistan is in this situation where it's stuck geostrategically in many ways doing the bidding of the U.S. But at the same time, the foreign aid that kind of plays a role in furthering the counterterrorism policy has in some way had a relationship, I think, to the corruption within Pakistan. So, I mean, it's a very tricky situation. Now you have elections coming up. You had, obviously, I think that the approval rating in Pakistan right now toward the U.S., it's not even in the double digits, right? So it's a very, very precarious situation. And there's a number of solutions and a number of things that people have been focusing on recently. But absolutely, Americans need to engage in Pakistan and really be aware of what's happening because people are already talking about it. Like if you look at the GOP primaries, for example, I mean, people have already been talking about Pakistan, and I believe like Huntsman in one of the, I think in the recent primary, not in New Hampshire, but in the one before that, in Iowa, was actually talking about Pakistan and about the importance of it. I think he was stressing a little bit too much fear-mongering. I think playing off a lot of the ignorance of the American public when he was talking about it. But I do think it's important for Americans to think about Pakistan, but not necessarily give into the fear-mongering aspect of it.
Yeah, Muhammad, this is Malik. The United States and the Pakistani government has, over the last decade in this quote-unquote war on terror, has formed a partnership at the top. But we see a growing disdain for U.S. policy for the Americans on the ground in Pakistan. A lot has to do with the drone attacks that have killed civilians over and over and over again. Can you talk a little bit about the lowering of the temperature from the American perspective and how that would sort of boost the relations between the Pakistani citizens and the Americans?
Right. So, I mean, definitely the drone attacks have played a huge role in angering the Pakistani public, and certainly even recently the capture of an alleged CIA spy who had apparently killed 2 Pakistanis. That sort of has spanned a lot of like nationalistic fervor to really assert like Pakistani sovereignty and protecting it. The one thing that I think a lot of people, Pakistanis heard from, no matter like what their political affiliation was, where is the sort of apology for the drone attack? Another thing you oftentimes hear is, 9/11 certainly, with the tragic killing of people with the Twin Towers, very tragic thing that happened, but no sort of like, collective reflection on the fact that there's been, I think, 10,000 like Pakistani soldiers killed, numbers of like, civilians who've been killed. And so far there hasn't really been a very forthright apology. I think it's going to also be very difficult to get that because Barack Obama is facing off with Republican candidates, and in this sort of macho presidential kind of competition, no one really wants to like make an apology against for killing civilians because they might be construed as being a wimp, right? So it's especially between now and like November. I don't know how that is going to be done, but certainly what is needed, and I think there's a lot of consensus around this, is some sort of gesture from the U.S. government to apologize for the drone attacks and to apologize for some of the recent, erosions in Pakistani sovereignty. How that's going to be accomplished, still, like as I said, in this political climate of electoral politics in the U.S., that's going to be really difficult to figure out. I'm not sure how that's going to happen.
In irony to these drone attacks that are happening right now, these U.S.-led drone attacks in Pakistan, is something that I think could be traced back to the late 1970s. There was something that was called the Baghdad Pact. That was Pakistan was a member of the Central Treaty Organization.
Right.
And the Baghdad Pact was signed. And basically, when Pakistan was created, there was a lot of worry in that the country had limited financial resources. And the U.S. had signed this pact promising economic aid to Pakistan. And basically, since the signing of this this Baghdad Pact, there's been foreign aid going to Pakistan. And what we're seeing is that there was this very turbulent relationship that was created between U.S. administrations and political elite, whether they were from the military or whether they weren't. And Muhammad, can you talk to us a little bit about this paradoxical relationship that developed? We do have drones in Pakistan, and at the same time, our foreign aid money is being delivered there to build relationships with politicians.
I should also take a step back and say that unfortunately we also have drones, which the Miami police actually recently purchased. so
Wow.
It's becomes a little more complex as well. But yeah, the foreign aid is a very tricky sort of discussion, debate right now, right? So there was the Kerry Lugar Act. There was the whole history that you talked about from the 1970s. A lot of that was part of the Cold War politics between, the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Of course, after 1965, India sort of became sided with Russia, and Pakistan developed a better relationship with China. That served U.S. interests in a very interesting way because it opened up the door for U.S. through Kissinger to engage China, actually through Pakistan, and it was through that engagement at that time. So the U.S. has like plenty of examples of how engaging with Pakistan can also lead to like collateral benefits in other diplomatic negotiations. The specific problem with like foreign aid, it's very problematic. I mean, you talk to some Pakistanis and they'll tell you straight up. They'll tell you, look, there should just be no foreign aid, period. And they'll talk about IMF and they'll say we need to cut off those loans and we need to become totally self-sufficient. The problem though with that is that for example, Pakistan's a country that is highly dependent on primary goods, things like cotton, textiles, agriculture, right? It's not exactly like it's not a sort of service economy. It's sort of locked into producing like these really basic goods to put out to the market. So it's the sort of like time-tested sort of problem that a lot of developing countries faced, including countries that were in Africa during decolonization.
Muhammad, we're gonna have to cut you off really quickly when we go to a commercial break, but I definitely want to remember that thought, and we'll continue it right when we get back. Okay?